there is no crisis. There's nothing close to a crisis. Even today, there's not enough CO2 compared to what plants would prefer. In America, there really is a deep state.
Goedendag mensen, welkom bij het panel. Vandaag met een internationale gast, dus ik schakel over naar het Engels. Life on Earth is in crisis. Our climate is changing faster than scientists predicted and the stakes are high. Mass extinction. We're running out of time and our governments have failed to act. We humans are responsible and too much CO2 in the atmosphere is the cause of global warming. Climate scientists consensus agrees on all this, but not my guest from today. He's a former science advisor and National Security Council member of Donald Trump's administration, a Cyrus Fogg Brackett Professor of Physics, emeritus at Princeton University. His view is carbon dioxide is good, we need more of it. The climate is changing, but man-made influence is very uncertain and there is no climate alarm. Professor Happer, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be with you.
So, my first question to you has got to be, is the whole scientific world in this field crazy or are you crazy?
Well, I don't think the whole scientific world supports the idea that there is a climate emergency. You know, many scientists are afraid to speak up because of the consequences of speaking your mind. And so if you say this whole emergency talk is crazy, you know, people won't speak to you, they won't speak to your wife, you know, it's better just to be quiet. But I don't think that there is a scientific consensus. I think any honest survey of science, of people who know enough to comment, would not support the idea that there is a consensus. For example, you know, recently Steve Koonin, who was the Undersecretary of Energy for Science under Obama, Democratic administration, wrote a very nice book called Unsettled, where he points out all the problems with these alleged crises. There is no crisis. There's nothing close to a crisis.
But how is that possible? Because we're being told 97% of climate scientists agree there is a huge crisis. Our governments have just been all in Glasgow creating huge deals, of preventing this apocalypse that is coming our way. And yet here is somebody saying, no, that's all basically not true. Is that? I'm just trying to figure out how that's possible.
Well, first of all, the 97% figure is just not true. You know, if you were to do an honest survey, you would find very smaller percentages of support. Mm-hmm. I would be surprised if it would be more than, say, 20%.
So where does the IPCC says it's 97, right? So
it's a made-up number.
So how can they just make that up? Why would this is the smartest people in the world are in this field? Yeah. How is it possible that the people are not saying then, well, listen, come on, it's not. Well, this is not reality.
I disagree that it's the smartest people in the world.
Oh yeah, why?
Well, for example, if you look at many climate scientists, what's a climate scientist? It's somebody who works in physics, someone in chemistry, someone in oceanography.
Are you a climate scientist?
I'm a physicist, but I know more about climate than most climate scientists.
Yeah, because that's one of the critiques of you. And they say, well, he's not a climate scientist. What's he talking about? It's not even his field.
Actually, I was a co-author of one of the first books on climate in 1982. Mm-hmm. You know, that was long before Al Gore got interested in it. Mm-hmm. And we didn't see anything terribly exciting about it at that time. Mm-hmm. And the reason I went to Washington originally was because I had solved some very important problems dealing with the atmosphere and radiation propagation in the atmosphere. So I had.
It was in the 70s for the Defense Department, or not? Did
I consulted every summer with a group called Jason.
Yeah.
And we worked on classified problems for Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. And in 1982 was the beginning of the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars so-called effort. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems then was could you defend America from incoming missiles with high-power lasers? You know, could you take a megawatt laser or multi-megawatt laser and burn an incoming attacking missile up before it could cause damage?
Right.
And so the answer is no. For example, today you couldn't do it because it's cloudy. So,
right.
Yeah, it might be clear skies. You know, the skies do clear up occasionally, even in Holland.
Yeah.
And but even if it's perfectly clear sky, if you aim a laser at a missile that's 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers away, by the time it reaches the missile, the beam breaks up into lots of sub-beams, filaments they call them, and each filament doesn't have enough power to cause any damage. And that's because of the atmosphere, which has little patches of warm air and cold air. And so this is the same thing you see when you look at night at stars. The stars twinkle, you know, they're not steady.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a problem known to astronomers, and astronomers knew how to solve it. If you have a very bright star, you can actually use the starlight to measure these atmospheric perturbations, and then you can distort the receiving mirror to undo the perturbations, and you get a perfect image. And so people knew that if we were attacked by someone at night, you know, from the direction of the brightest star in the sky, we could defend ourselves because we could correct the atmosphere, but there are not stars all over the sky, you know, that are bright enough to use, and there's no reason the enemy would attack you from the direction of a bright star.
Right, right. And
When I heard about this problem, this was in 1982, I said, well, I know how to make an artificial star, and then we can put it anywhere we like, and if the missile's coming from that direction, we'll put the star over there. That direction, we'll put it over there.
Right.
And so it turns out that there's this layer of sodium atoms at 100 kilometers all around the Earth. And there's so many of them that if you shine a sodium-tuned laser toward them, you make a bright yellow star, and you can use that bright star to measure the atmospheric distortions and correct for them.
Sure.
So it's called the sodium guide star. It's used today in all new telescopes. So all around the world, if you go there at night, you'll see this yellow beam going up to correct for atmospheric turbulence. So I knew a lot more about the atmosphere than most climate scientists did.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my conclusion as well, that we can say that you know a thing or two about the atmosphere.
I definitely know more than most of them.
Yeah. So because the interesting thing is, before I want to go a little bit into the numbers and lay out for people what we're actually talking about, you know, the greenhouse effect and particles per million and things.
Right.
How do you think it can be that whenever your name is being brought up, they're saying, but he's not a climate scientist, yet they're willing to listen to a teenager from Sweden?
Right.
How do you think that's possible? Greta Thunberg.
Well, nobody wants to listen to a critic, and so you have to think of some reason that you shouldn't listen to them. And so if they're not part of the club, then supposedly they don't have anything sensible to say. I don't know. It's a natural... I don't think that's very hard to understand.
Well, I think it is, to be honest. I think it's quite mad, actually, to listen to a 17 or 18-year-old teenager saying that the world's in a huge crisis, opposed to somebody who was already trying to protect us from attacks from other galaxies in the 70s and 80s. I mean, that's quite absurd to me. So so it is hard for me to understand, because it has huge consequences, the fact that everybody seems to agree, because all the money goes into there as well.
Well, it's the groupthink problem, you know, that most people are too lazy to try and think for themselves. Yeah. And so they sort of say, you know, what are people thinking today? And I will think the same thing. Right. And so it's been that way as throughout recorded history. People try to think what other people do, so people will like them, and they'll...
Conformism.
Yeah.
Conformism and a bit of ease. Is what you're saying? Just you don't have to bother in
That's right.
putting too much effort in critical thinking, you just can't continue with your day.
That's right. It's much easier to just go with the flow.
Right. So let's not go with the flow and delve into your mind, and let's try to understand a little bit more what we're talking about here. It's could you talk a little bit about what's actually going on? We're being told all the time, fossil fuel is bad. When we burn that, we get CO2 into the atmosphere, greenhouse effect. This is bad. This is warming up, destroying our planet. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about how your vision on that?
Well, carbon dioxide is what you get from burning fossil fuel. Mm-hmm. If you burn it in the wrong way, you can get carbon monoxide, and that's actually poisonous and dangerous. But normally, carbon dioxide is what comes out. We breathe out, you're breathing out carbon dioxide, so am I. Mm-hmm. Quite a lot. Every day you breathe out about 2 pounds of carbon dioxide. And so there are 8 billion people in the world, puffing out carbon dioxide, so it's not negligible.
Yeah.
And
well, what does that mean?
So it's completely natural. It's healthy. Plants need carbon dioxide to grow. When people say we have to get rid of the CO2 in the air, I can't imagine what they're thinking of, because even today there's not enough CO2 compared to what plants would prefer. We're living today in a time of CO2 famine with respect to geological history.
There's not enough of it.
Not enough of it.
We need more of it.
We need more of it.
We need more of the thing what's now being told. We need billions to invest into preventing.
Right. That's exactly right. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd.
Well, it's hard to understand for me as a bit of an outsider in that field. Well,
if you look at the geological record, where you can estimate past amounts of CO2. We didn't have people measuring it, but you can look at things like the ratios of isotopes of carbon and oxygen, and from that make a pretty good estimate of what past CO2 levels were. And almost never has it been this low. Over most of geological history, it's been 4 times, 5 times what it is today. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 parts per million, much higher.
Yeah, we're now in 414 2 days ago. I saw.
Yes.
It's being measured in Hawaii every day.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
I know that site. I've been to that site.
I can imagine you know that site. I can imagine that. Yeah.
Right.
So, but still, this is a very concrete number. You can just look at this number and say this is a problem or not.
I say that the number should really be more like 1,500 or 2,000. That would be ideal, for the world. But there isn't enough fossil fuel to raise it that much. There's not enough coal and oil to do that.
So we can just quit with the whole climate change plans of all the governments. We can quit with it right now.
The right answer would be to quit. That would be the right answer.
Now, with the whole thing.
Let me make one thing clear, though, that I'm not talking about real pollutants, because if you are careless about burning coal or burning oil or natural gas, you make real pollutants. For example, fly ash from coal. You don't want that all over the countryside. Or there are oxides of nitrogen that you make, or sulfur comes out. So those should be regulated, and I'm all in favor of that.
Right.
Yeah. But not CO2. CO2 is not harmful. In fact, it's beneficial. It's beneficial.
Do your colleagues agree with you, like behind closed doors, if there are no cameras?
But behind closed doors, many of them will agree.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. But they will not agree in public. Yeah.
And how does a conversation like that go? I mean, what do I tell you if I'm your colleague? I say, listen, I have to say, I agree with you, but I need my position. Or
yes. We have to be careful. People will lose their confidence in science, and funding might be cut. Next year's budget for research might go down. So it's that type of discussion.
And what do you say to them?
I say, well, I don't think that's true, because I've been in Washington and I've funded things, and I'm pretty confident that the funding would continue, even for honest climate science. Because climate is important. You'd like to know what next year's weather is going to be, if possible. it makes a big difference in, for example, what you plant if you're a farmer, especially in America where we have dry years and wet years.
Right.
If you knew in advance it was going to be a dry year, you would plant something different than if you knew it was a wet year.
Right.
And
What do you say to them, to your colleagues that are not publicly saying what they believe in private, that they are perhaps a little bit cowards?
Well, I don't know what to do with my colleagues. They're humans, and they face also this enormous blowback.
So are you? No, you're a human as well. I
Well,
assume.
I have, I guess, a thicker skin than most, and it's worth it to me to take some abuse, to tell the truth.
But why? Why are you able to do that? Why, you don't have anything to lose. You don't have.
Well, I think yes, there are a number of reasons. That's a good point. Partly, I'm retired, right? So I have independent income. Partly, as a result of my own research, I did a startup company, and I made some money, so I'm not dependent on government funding.
Right, that helps.
And so that helps.
Yeah.
And partly, when people criticize me, if it's someone I respect, I listen carefully, and sometimes I change my mind. But if it's someone I don't respect, then I don't pay any attention to them.
Oh yeah? Right. So let's switch to your was it a year almost with the Trump administration?
Yes,
more or less a year.
About a year.
Can you tell me how the first contact went? How did he or they ask you?
Well, people from the White House called me and said, we need someone down here to help us with emerging technologies, and we know of your previous work, and we'd like you to come and head this new office on emerging technologies in National Security Council. And I said, well, okay, I'll help you, but I my main interest right now is to stop all of the nonsense on climate. So if you will let me try and do something on that at the same time, I will come. And so there was silence for a week or two, and finally they called again and said, okay, come on, you can try. We won't guarantee that it will work.
Yeah, is that what they said?
You can try, yeah.
All right. So you went to
So
Washington.
I went. I said, okay, I said, I'm going to spend a year here. So I leased an apartment for a year.
You had to leave.
I had to leave. I'd leave Princeton, so I moved to Washington.
And you moved to Washington.
Right. And my wife stayed in Princeton, so I went home on weekends when I could.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so I took a 1-year lease, and I said, if I make some progress on climate, I'll take a 2nd-year lease. Otherwise, I'm going home.
Right. So, you weren't sure yourself as well.
I was not sure.
Right.
Yes.
So, and then you had your first meeting with Trump.
Yes. Well, my first meeting with Trump was a few months after that, and we talked about climate.
How was that? Can you describe that meeting?
He was very sympathetic. He said, well, I think that there isn't very much science to this. It's almost become a secular religion, which is true. And,
that's what he said.
We need to help to get the facts out. But his advisors did not like that. They were afraid that would lose votes in the future. And so it was a very strained discussion with Trump. Trump was on my side.
Can you tell me the setting? Is that how many people are in such a meeting, more or less? Is that you, the
it would
president?
Be typically in the Oval Office.
Right.
There might be a dozen people there.
Right.
And so Mr. Trump himself and his chief of staff is always there. And the head of the Economic Advisors Council is usually there, and Ivanka is often there.
Oh, yeah, right. And they're already thinking about re-election.
Everyone is thinking about re-election.
It's one of the main problems with American politics, I think. The moment you get elected, you're thinking about how am I going to get re-elected? No, is that not? Well,
I've never won an election in my life. Not even for dog catcher, right?
Okay, right.
And so I'm not the right one to criticize this.
Right. No, that's a good point. So I understood that you wanted to put in place a red team and a blue team.
I did.
Oh, you did do that.
I wanted to do that.
You wanted to do that. Yeah.
Yes.
What was the idea behind that, and why didn't that work out?
Well, any other major decision we take, say in defense, say if we're going to build a new aircraft carrier, we're going to build a new type of submarine, they always have a red team review.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is you bring in proponents for the new system, say the new submarine, and then you bring in critics.
Mm-hmm.
And you spend weeks, arguing about what is wrong with this thing and why it won't work or why it'll be too expensive or why you can't build it on schedule. And every one of those objections has to be answered in a satisfactory way.
Right.
And so that's called a red team review. And it's standard operating procedure for most of the government. And it's very, very useful.
Not only for Defense Department. It's for
Not only for defense, yeah.
Okay.
Even private companies often do that.
Right.
And
so that's why you propose that?
That's why I proposed it. And it was, just fanatically opposed by the climate establishment. They've never had to defend anything they've done, and,
right.
To a knowledgeable opponent.
But why didn't Trump say then, this is my man, this sounds good, let's do that? It's, I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that.
Because of the election,
Yeah, right, but... Yeah.
So,
so it's even for him that he has a public profile, at least, that at that point he just sat on Twitter wherever he thought, and he was, completely free-spirited in his thinking. He was already cautious, even when he probably thought you were right.
Well, he tried to listen to his political advisors, and they were most of them very much against a red team, blue team review because they thought it would cost far too many votes, especially among women. Many women are, especially like Greta, for example, are especially worried about climate because they're trusting. I love women, but they when you tell them something, you can lie through your teeth, and they give you the benefit of the doubt.
Is that true? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Well, that's not always my experience, but that's another subject for another.
Many of them, it's that way.
Yeah, no. Is that true? You think they are more naive than men in such a way? Yeah.
I think they tend to be more trusting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a kinder term.
Yeah.
To,
I mean, I admire that in many ways. But in the case of climate, it's a pack of lies, most of it, yeah.
Right. So at that time, you felt you needed to quit, right? When that...
Well, I didn't quit. I told them I'd spend a year, and they asked me to remain for another year. I said, no, I'm sticking with my original agreement. So my lease is up next month, and I'm going home.
Yeah.
So I had expected to have a little going-away party that... my direct boss was not Mr. Trump, it was John Bolton. I was in the National Security Council.
Right.
So John Bolton was to say a few nice words. We were going to have some drinks, and, I was going to wave goodbye to everyone. And so the week before I was to leave, John Bolton was fired because he and Mr. Trump didn't see eye to eye on a number of things. So there was no one to wish me goodbye.
Okay.
His deputy did a very good job.
Yeah.
Charlie Cooperman did a great job, but it was
it was a strange
surprise.
Right.
Yeah.
What was your view on the Trump phenomenon before you went in? What did you think of Donald Trump?
Well, I thought that it was. I think many Americans were not so much voting for Mr. Trump, but voting against the establishment, the political establishment, which was personified by Hillary.
Yeah.
And I think...
whom you know as well, at least her husband, no? You've also worked for the Clinton administration.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I worked for them for 3 months. And
yeah. And then they also said... Thank you very much, but
right. Well,
there was Al Gore, no?
It was Al Gore. Mr. Clinton didn't care, but this was a sore point for Al Gore that he had this denier here working in his administration.
Right, he was just working on his movie, and right.
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you when you were talking about Mr. Clinton.
Well, no. So in the end, after hemming and hawing for several months, they decided not to have the review. I'd put together a good team, And we expected all sorts of lawsuits. So
Yeah.
part of that is you have a big staff of lawyers who are ready to take on the lawsuits. And so it's hard to do anything in America. The system is designed to be that way.
Oh, yeah?
And
To keep the status quo?
just to make it hard for the government to do anything, good or bad.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
As a protection in a way.
It's a protection in a way, that's correct, yeah.
Right. It's not really working at this time very well.
It's
is
not
it?
working
Because,
well, no, that's correct, yeah.
I mean, if you're there right now, you have...
But look, it is working in some sense that, all of the green fanaticism is not doing well in Congress, and it probably, most of it will be rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of the system, it makes it very, very difficult to do anything radical in the American system.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to have it that way.
Talking about radicals, I also read that Greenpeace did a sting operation on you.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
What happened there? Can you talk about that?
Well, I don't know, some person sent me an email, says, I would like you to write an op-ed about the benefits of CO2, so I've written lots of op-eds, as we've discussed, I firmly believe that more CO2 is a benefit.
Yeah. They offered you money as well, as I read?
They said, can we make a donation? And I said,
a donation.
Well, I don't take money for that, but I'm trying to set up this little organization, the CO2 Coalition, and if you would like to donate to them, that would be fine with me.
Right.
And then they said, well, we don't want our name used. Is there some way we can donate anonymously? I said, well, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, and I'll ask around. Maybe you can do it.
Yeah, that's tricky, though.
So I was glad to have them donate. I'm glad to take money from anyone to help us spread our message.
Yeah.
But it was not money for me. And
no, but it's a completely different thing as you writing a piece and sending them a bill, and then there would be something wrong.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
If they say I want to donate to your cause, I mean...
That's right, that's right. Yeah. And so it was carefully orchestrated with Greenpeace and, the Guardian newspaper and everything like that. It was designed to smear. It was a hatchet job. And so...
It's always a Guardian also, no? For some reason... Why is that? Do you know why that is? That the Guardian is always so propagandistic in this way?
I don't know. They traditionally have embraced these bizarre causes. Global warming is one of them, but I think there are others as well. And
well, let me name another one that I really wanted to put to you as well. Right now we're living in COVID times.
Right.
And it's my modest observation that there are quite some similarities in the way that's being handled, and also what the press is doing. But mostly the fact that you cannot doubt what's going on. There seems to be again that consensus. You should not question that consensus because this is a crisis, and in a crisis situation, we should all be basically like in the past times also when the president was going to a war. No? Saying you have to be behind the president right now because there was a war. Do you see similarities as well?
I think COVID reactions have been very similar to climate. It's been supported strongly by most of the media. And it's been very difficult to get real data about what's happening in COVID. COVID has increased mortality over most of the world. In the United States, it's about 10% last year, more deaths than we normally would have had. It's mostly people who have confounding conditions, who are sick for some other reason. The elderly are very susceptible. I had a COVID a year ago. It was like a mild cold, and I've had much worse colds.
Don't say that. You can't say it's just a mild cold.
Yeah,
that's at least in Holland that's forbidden to say that.
I see. Well, that's
COVID denier.
A cold denier. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't taste anything for a week, but that was not
Right.
a terrible.
No, of course. So what is the current climate in about this in the US then? Because right here we now have green passes. You need to have like a digipass.
Again, I mentioned that it's hard to make things happen in the United States intentionally. The system is designed that way. So you can sue the government in court, and so judges can set aside crazy laws, and they do.
Yeah.
And furthermore, we have fairly independent states, so what one state does can be very different from another. So, for example, in Florida, they've been very liberal about COVID, and their outcome has been about the same as anybody else, So that shows that whatever measures you take hardly make any difference.
Right.
COVID will run its course and disappear, as previous epidemics have.
Yeah.
It's really not different from other epidemics that have plagued mankind forever.
Yet the Biden administration is putting mandates in place, or at least it wants to. And
I doubt they will get it through the courts.
yeah, the courts right now rejected it a few days ago.
Yeah, that's right.
That's quite. Yeah, you doubt that it will get through? Yeah.
I would be very surprised.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, of course, I don't know. When you go to court, anything can happen, but you can appeal it, right?
Right. But before we talked about you being in the Oval Office and you said there were a minimum 12 people, usually these things are not being done just by the president, right? I mean, here in the news, many times it's Biden wants this, and it's not Biden who wants that or comes up with it, right? It's a bit more behind than just Mr. Biden.
There really is in America, there really is a deep state, which means there's a permanent bureaucracy that doesn't change when there's an election. They're not elected.
Right.
And many of them are very good civil servants. I admire them. But others, their interests are not the same as the interests of the United States. It's the interests of, their group, their deep state. And,
and which group is that? What is that group?
Well, it's civil servants. We have an enormous number of people who work for the government. They're federal employees. And they spend their life there,
No, sure, I get that. But which interests are they representing then again, which are not in the interest of the general public? Who are that?
If you're in the deep state, your main interest is next year's budget. How much money does Congress allot for you? So that's your primary interest.
Is that the primary interest?
Yeah. Everything else is secondary. The climate is secondary. Health is secondary. The budget is number one.
But not problem solving, not public interest.
That's right. I mean, money. I was the same way when I was a bureaucrat. That was my main interest.
Yeah? Yeah. Was that more important to you than the science? Yeah.
Well,
how is that possible?
You get so distracted worrying about your budget, that you begin to forget while you're there. Right?
Oh yeah. Even a critical thinker as yourself.
Yeah. Well, there's a joke. I'll tell you a joke, and it's about. There's a new secretary of the Navy, and he's a political appointee. The president appoints him, and he shows up at the Pentagon. And he has a young aide who's a naval officer, a captain of a ship, but he's assigned to the secretary. Mm-hmm. And they go around for a whole year. The secretary gives speeches, he writes memos, he sends out commands. And at the end of the first year, they're sitting at a bar, and both have had a little too much to drink. And the officer says, Mr. Secretary, you're the third Secretary of the Navy that I have trained, and you're the best I've trained you. You're the fastest learner I've ever had. And he says, how we do this? We bring you up to the bridge, and we let you get your hands on the wheel, and you turn the ship to port, and you turn the ship to starboard, and you shout commands. And at the end of the year, if you're really doing well, we attach the wheel to the rudder, and so that's right. So that's the way they operate, and
right.
And in many cases, that's good, because when you come in, you don't know very much, and so you'd like someone who knows how it really works to be helping you.
Sure.
But there's a limit, at some point, you really do want to make changes, and the bureaucracy doesn't want to make changes, and
right.
Then it's a problem, and Mr. Trump had a serious problem there because there were some changes that needed to be made that the permanent bureaucracy resisted, and in the end they won. Yeah.
It's difficult to beat them, I guess.
Very hard to defeat them.
Our media, our mainstream media, portrayed Trump for 4 years as a complete idiot that basically didn't do anything right.
Mm-hmm.
That was a mental patient. That was a danger to democracy. That was somebody that just needed to be out of office as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that way our journalists?
Well, it's a completely distorted picture. I think he was very good for America, and I think that he was tremendously handicapped by the hostility that surrounded him, especially in the press. I mean, he used to talk about the lying media, and it was really true. they did lie.
And why they hate him so much, you think?
Well, he was not part of the political establishment, and he was not part of the right-thinking, progressive establishment. He used coarse language, and that was why many Americans loved him. You know?
And still do, I think, or no?
I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I would hate to be running for president in 2024, on the Democratic ticket, because I think it's going to be a very, very difficult race for them. Yeah,
because he's going again.
I don't know whether he will or not, but he may.
Yeah.
But even if he doesn't, whoever runs, if they promote the same policies, I think will be very hard to beat. Because people now they don't think things are going well in America, and there's tremendous dissatisfaction with the direction of the country. Inflation, for example, is sort of out of control.
Right.
All prices are going up.
Well, here's the same thing: gas, food.
Yes.
It's getting absolutely crazy.
Right.
Is that something that that people have the feeling that is being done also? I mean, is that a natural cause? Things are just running out of hand, and the economic system is on its last years, or you think that there is policy as well to make life of people more difficult?
I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes the difference between malice and stupidity.
It is. By the way, I was hoping you could shed some light there, being an insider.
Well, I think in areas like the environment and climate, there is essentially malice. These fanatical environmentalists have control for the time being of the White House, and so many of Mr. Trump's policies don't make any sense. So he demands the Saudi
Biden
and the Arabs produce more oil, where it's oil we could have produced ourselves in America. We have still lots of oil in America,
right?
But it's very hard to get it now because of administration policies.
Yeah,
and so that's clearly deliberate. But he's having a hard time there, even within his own party. For example, in the recent budget negotiations, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, which is a big coal mining state, has been a thorn in the flesh of the Biden administration, and has basically won. And I think we're going to see more of that, because especially after the next election, the midterm elections in the fall of next year,
right?
Unless things improve drastically, it's going to be a massacre for the current.
Yeah,
people.
It doesn't look too good, right? Something that's happening here regarding the climate change, however you want to call it, is that there are plans from the Dutch government to take away land from farmers, because they say they are poisoning too much the climate, too much pollution from the cows and the lands, and so they have plans actually to put them away from their land. How do you react to that when you hear
Well,
that's going on?
I think it's outrageous, and I can't believe that it's even legal in Holland. You know, I always thought of Holland as a model for democracy. You know, when we put together the American Constitution, we studied the Dutch Republic very carefully, and so there are chapters about how the Dutch Republic worked.
Yeah.
And one of the wonderful things about it was this respect for, you know, the rights of every individual, including farmers.
Right.
Know, not just the rights of university graduates in Amsterdam. You know, it's
right. Well, I can tell you that the Dutch individual rights at this point are not at its best.
Well, I hope that the Dutch have enough strength of character that they can stop this. They should stop this.
Yeah, but there you see the same mechanism is that quite some people also believe what the press and the government says, that these farmers are bad, they're polluting the climate, there is a tragedy, we have 12 years left, says Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, to live. We have to act now. These people have to go. And people just go along with that. Many people do. Of course, not everybody.
I don't know. It may be that the only way to solve this problem is to let some country, I hope it isn't Holland, or some big state in America, do everything that the Greens demand.
Yeah.
And just see what happens.
See what happens.
Yeah.
Is there an example somewhere already around the world where they are pretty far and you can see already things are going...
Well, in America, I think the California is in most danger of really going past the tipping point,
right,
you know, for climate fanaticism. But it's not there yet. And in Europe, you know, Germany, you know, the Energiewende, you know, that's not going well. And with each year, it'll be harder for them.
Right.
You know, in America, we had in the early 1900s, late 1800s, we had this eugenics movement, which was a lot like climate. You know, everybody believed in eugenics, and that
What is that?
Well, it was the idea that the American Anglo-Saxon race was smarter than anyone else in the world, you know, and we were having all of these low IQ Italians and Poles and, you know, Chinamen coming in and diluting the gene pool, you know. It was all lies. It was completely crazy. But there were journals, and people believed in it, and university presidents were for it, and little towns had women's eugenics movements. They had tea every week, and they wrung their hands about how we were ruining the gene pool.
Oh, really?
And it was really disgusting and corrupt, and it was eventually brought down, not because we finally recognized how false it was, but because of the Nazis, you know. Because they took everything we had done in America and then they distorted it, and, you know, it turned into the horrible things that they did. You know, it was based on eugenics, you know, the same stuff that we had said. And they said it, but they took it seriously, you know.
Right.
And so that's an example, and I hope that we don't need an example like that for climate. I hope it will collapse, you know, with much less damage. But that brought eugenics to an end in America and most of the West. They had a similar movement in England, and it also brought it down there. Yeah. But sometimes we had a similar thing in America. I think the closest thing I know to the climate frenzy in America was prohibition. You know, in the late 1918, 1919, we passed this constitutional amendment, of all things, that we'd prohibit alcohol, and everyone was for it. You couldn't object to it. It was like objecting to climate. You know, people would shun you. You know, you're in league with demon rum, and so every state in the union except one passed this stupid amendment, and everything that the critics said happened. The critics said, well, it'll be hard to enforce. Of course, it wasn't enforced at all. It will encourage organized crime, you know,
Al Capone.
Al Capone. In fact, the crime, the drug dealing, everything we have now, it goes back to prohibition. We brought it on ourselves. That's when they got their start. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we eventually voted it out after 15 years, but it caused great damage to society, to morals, and
so we can say time and time again, people are quite easily fooled.
They're easily fooled. That's correct. They're easily fooled.
They're easily fooled, which, well, again, I think brings us back to these times when, at least, I don't know if you know that, but we are living sometimes under lockdowns. We cannot leave our own house here. We cannot go out in the night.
Yes.
Because that's for our own health. That's supposedly good.
Yes. Yes.
Which is always tricky.
We're doing
also.
it for your own good.
It's for your own good. That's when governments
right,
are saying they're doing something for your own good. And I always start to feel a little itchy. Should I or not? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Happer, very much for this chat. Is there anything else that you would like to add to what we spoke about?
I do encourage you to defend the best principles of Dutch democracy, and I wish you great success, and it takes some courage.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been an honor talking to you and having you here.
Thank you.
En u, bedankt. Ik hoop dat u het interessant vond. Weer dit panel van vandaag. We het kijken of het luisteren. Word lid, hè. Word lid van ons, mensen. Want in januari gaan we officieel van start. Tot het volgende panel. Dag.